Okay.
So Dan, $10 million in grants, over $1 million in core development, $8 million pledged annually for the EOS Antelope Coalition, which united the 4 key EOS families of EOS, Telos, Wax, and the UX network, all under the rebranded EOS.io to Antelope brand. There is renewed optimism and a real sense of ambition in the EOS community. Therefore, I have 2 questions. One, why was the EOS Network Foundation able to do in 1 year what block.one and frankly you were unable to do for EOS in 4 years? And 2, do you regret leaving the EOS community just as things have started to turn around?
Oh, wow. So there's lots of reasons why block.one was unable to do what EOS Network Foundation has done in this past year. Or the primary one is the after the release of the code, almost immediately there was SEC investigation going on, and our entire legal posture was the EOS network was launched by the community, decentralized people. The EOS network is not block.one. block.one was responsible for the code base, and so that kind of forced the community to be responsible entirely for marketing and branding and positioning of EOS, coordinating things like wallets. Within block.one, in the first year, we were building next generation wallets and we were doing all these things, but the legal side of things did not allow us to release. I had to fight to get the EOS.io Authenticator open sourced. And the primary reason why Brendan didn't want to release it as an app by block.one, which would allow us to control the user interface, was because we didn't have account creation. And we couldn't do account creation without dealing in the token, without a whole bunch of regulatory things tying us in. So block.one had a huge liability with the unexpected $4 billion that came in, which really put us in a very, very defensive posture, legally speaking, to make sure that we were focused on the code and that. So for the first year, after, in 1 year we built EOS.io. The second year we did EOS.io 2, which was a significant performance enhancement, and there's rapid progress. And we built a front end. And during that same time, I was running a team trying to build Steam 2.0 on voice, and also, I guess, what has become bullish. So we were doing a lot of things, and during that whole time, the plan was to launch on EOS. We bought a ton of RAM, or block.one bought a ton of RAM, with the intention of creating accounts and doing voice on EOS. And it was a combination of regulatory issues and other things that kind of made that not happen. And a lot of those things were beyond my control. So my talent in the space is in technological development, which we'll see later today when we talk about Sybase. But in the economic incentives, that's my talent. But when it comes to organizing things or dealing with all the regulatory things or all the business stuff, that's things that I partner with other people to tackle. And sometimes there's even those people are facing things that are beyond any one person's ability to take, if you're risk adverse. Some people have nothing to lose. They live in a country that is not as strict as the United States. They're not a US citizen, and they have relatively few assets to speak of. They can't fall very far. But when you got lots of shareholders, you got lots of things, all of a sudden, you've got a long way to fall, and that just changes the calculus in ways that a lot of people have a hard time appreciating.
Okay. So I want to go back a little bit in time to try and understand or better understand a few things. So can you describe to me what your understanding of how the ENF would work was in August of 2021, when both you and Eves announced its formulation? So you mentioned, I believe it was you who mentioned that the organization would be temporary. However, the ENF, the EOS Network Foundation, in their literature, they made no such claims. So I just wondered, were you both on the same page when the ENF was incepted in around August 2021?
Clearly, we weren't on the same page based on how things unfolded. When I left block.one, I immediately started working on a governance process. I didn't want to create an organization like the ENF, where the block producers give me a bunch of money to do all the stuff that ENF is doing now. I wanted to make sure that whoever was put in charge was democratically elected, that it was representative of the community, and that there was some accountability. So I wanted to build the governance process around it. And because I felt that that was necessary to protect the people involved. And in my particular case, because of my association with block.one, I also needed the extra cover of that. And I figured the best thing I could do is to give the EOS network the tools to govern itself, to make sure that it truly was decentralized. And Eve came along, and we were struggling with how are we going to fund this, right? How do we coordinate the block producers? It's going to take me, 6 to 9 months to get the basic governance tools in place and smart contracts. There's this time delay. Like, well, how are we going to do that? And so he said, well, I can coordinate the block producers, because he knew all of them, and he was going to set up a foundation. And my understanding was the purpose of the foundation was to fund the development of decentralized governance so that the foundation could be unwound and be unnecessary. So I agreed and supported the EOS Network Foundation with the perspective that he was going to take the short-term responsibility of funding the development of a decentralized governance. And decentralized governance was the top priority of the foundation. And so what's happened instead is decentralized governance has got a token amount of funding. I mean, it's a couple $1 million. But compared to how much funding has gone to everything else, very, very small. And even though we have an app, we have the ability to elect people, it hasn't gotten the support that it could get, given the situation. So there's no roadmap, there's no real development budget that I see for enhancing the governance process even further. And so that's where I think the difference is I thought, Eve was going to be the interim emperor, in position to hand power back to the Senate. And instead, he kept the power and didn't hand it to the Senate.
It's not an unfamiliar tale, holding on to power. So I want to go a bit more into detail on this, if that's okay. So it's December last year, 2021. Everything is seemingly great. You're working with the ENF and Eve LaRose closely. The ENF tweet that they're supporting you guys with the Mandel release, and everyone's excited. However, over the next few weeks, things didn't really turn out as both the community and I expected. So I want to go through that sort of bit by bit. So I kind of first want to understand who was responsible for the renewed EOS direction. So when did the first mention of Eden 2.0, sorry, when did you first mention Eden 2.0 to Eve LaRose and the, ENF, it would become the ENF? How did you describe it, and what was their response?
Well, early on, I guess about this time last year, we'd gotten the initial observations for Eden 1.0. We saw some of the paralysis of, we allocated budget, but no one wanted to spend it unilaterally, and there was just desire to come together. And the point was to give people budget that they could autonomously do what they needed to do without having to reach consensus at every step of the way. But instead, everyone wanted the social cover of doing things as a group. And instead of taking any responsibility for spending the money that the community allocated. And what we realized was that with Fractally, which we had the name Fractally about this time last year. And we were even considered potentially rebranding EOS and EOSIO to Fractally at one point. And then Eve suggested the Mandel name. Mandel is actually Eve's idea. The name there wasn't my idea. But the name Mandel came up because we were thinking in terms of fractals. That is when inside my team, we started getting some of these ideas for weekly elections and all the stuff that turned into what Fractally has become this past year and the Fractally white paper. So we spent 3 months and Eve helped fund some of the unsuccessfully. He funded a marketing agency to help us do branding and stuff, and they never actually produced anything useful for us. But he was very supportive of Fractally this time last year, and we were also had the contract to get the rebrand of EOS, because I guess it was about this time last year that the ENF coordinated with the block producers to take block.one's tokens. So
December the 7th, I believe.
Yeah, it was about little over a year ago. So we were trying to figure out, well, we need to get a new hard fork to ratify and verify that is the network going to upgrade and follow this behavior and so forth. So I worked with Eve and we came up with a minimal viable hard fork that would clean up some things, and we got a contract to deliver that in early January, which we delivered that part of it according to that contract, and now I guess since then it's been enhanced further and deployed. So it seems like that was a really good effort on things. But in the process of figuring out what I needed for Fractally, things like a better token standard, better NFT at a fundamental level, better exchange DeFi stuff built into the protocol with network subsidized liquidity. There are a number of things that I thought needed to be done for the EOS blockchain in order to provide the tools at the protocol level and at the built-in level to support what I wanted to build at a higher level, which is the Fractally governance app. Furthermore, I wanted to make sure that we had a roadmap for decentralized governance on EOS. So I made a request at that time for I build all these things, and it was for a couple $1 million at the price EOS was at the time, and that was priced in terms of EOS because I was going to take the EOS currency risk, which shows that my intention was to have alignment with the success of EOS. And then what happened, of course, EOS fell in price. But point is, the ENF felt that I was asking for too much and I wasn't providing a detailed enough roadmap. But my understanding, going back to the beginning with Eve, hey, Eve, you handle all this stuff, the administrative stuff of managing the block producers, and you allow me to be the CTO. You allow me to set the technical vision and roadmap. And instead, what happens? No, Dan, whatever roadmap you have for us, we have to approve. It's going to be by committee. And we like some of your ideas, but not others. Can you bid these on a point by point basis? And I just couldn't. I didn't want to be a software developer for hire that is just building what some committee thinks is necessary, and not able to build the foundation I needed for Fractally and fractal governance and so forth. So that's when we had the initial falling out, right? Certain people painted it as I was giving an ultimatum, I was asking for too much, or various things. But I find it ironic that in the 4 or 5 months after that, they spent as much on blue papers, just getting ideas organized, not even delivering anything. And then they put out bids for features. And then those bids come back for things that we were planning on delivering at much more than my original bid was, and priced in dollars, not in terms of EOS. So yeah, all things said, I don't think that, I think it vindicates that I wasn't actually charging a premium. I was just barely covering the operational costs. And any profit that I had baked in was entirely to fund governance for EOS. I just wasn't going to build a community explicitly for governance because that was a little bit more controversial. But I was taking 100% of everything I was doing to build governance and build apps and so forth. And I was trying to work with Eve to say, hey, here's a easy to explain thing that people can understand. Oh, we're getting token standards. Oh, we're getting DeFi. Oh, we're getting this NFT. We're getting better names. We're getting all these things. In addition to, I guess we had BFT and synchronous calls on the roadmap for EOS as well. So anyway, we had these roadmap features, and at the same time, I had arranged to hire a lot of the people that ENF eventually hired. And I was planning to have them come and work with me on a lot of this blockchain stuff. But when he hired them away, just like literally, I'd already made them the offer letter, giving them exactly what they had asked me for. And then ENF talks to them behind the scenes. They never talk to me. They never get back to me. The next thing I know, they've hired. They didn't even ask me for a counter. So that sort of soured things because I realized Eve is going to be in charge and in control of what things get funding, when they get funded, in control of all the messaging. And I was supposed to be in charge of the dev team. And I thought, well, if I have the dev team, that counterbalances his power with the block producers. But if I don't have the dev team and he's going to hire all these people behind the scenes, and he's going to be a better manager, organizer type thing, and he's spending community money, right? He's spending the inflation he's getting, and I'm spending my personal money. So, he's got a little bit more leverage and less personal skin in the game for the outcome. So he can buy votes and buy influence with a whole bunch of people using the community's money. It's no different than any other political situation where the politicians buy votes by promising public spending. And so everyone rallies to him because he's the one that's handing out the money, and he's got the money, and he controls the inflation. And I realized that wasn't a game I wanted to play. And I needed to have a plan in place to have fractal governance, decentralized governance, right? Even way back in the very beginning of EOS, the very first blog post I had, I talked about a constitution. I was trying to do something similar to Fractally with governance using smart contracts as the base, that was what EOS was supposed to be day zero, before the token distribution even began. That's what EOS was. But then, E and F, the ECAF and other things, people kind of said, that's governance is too scary. We just want token price go up, just be a faster Ethereum. Code is law, and that's what it's become. So I don't think the EOS community, the people who control the money in the EOS community are as interested in decentralized governance and decentralized societies. And I think that it was all the way back to the original vote buying that got the block producer cartel, right? Exchanges swapping votes, really undermined the democratic spirit. And Eve was a big part of that. He helped organize it, supported it, and worked against people that were against the vote buying, vote swapping. So he helped establish the cartel that's there. Maybe it was inevitable. Maybe, given the incentive model of the DPoS system that I created, that's what's going to happen. And I can't necessarily blame it, but there wasn't even an attempt to say, no, let's stand against this. And I think as anyone who stood against it didn't get any support from the other block producers, got voted out, and so forth. So there's this political process that's unfolded over the past 5 years with EOS. And I think Eve's been at the center of it since the beginning.
Okay, that was a great answer. There's a lot to unpack there. So let's go back to December. When you wrote on Telegram, Eve and I have a pretty good consensus on branding. I'm pumped. I didn't know this. So you had both agreed that you were moving in the direction of rebranding EOS and EOS.io as Fractally. Is that correct?
I think Mandel is what we had agreed on, and then we had Fractally on the other side. And we're going to have Fractally for the governance and Mandel for what became Antelope. Okay.
So I want to go back to the cartel part in a second. That was very interesting. But I think I'm going to jump ahead a few questions now because I think this is relevant. So you stated that you thought the BPs would support the new Fractally mechanism for producer selection. I think you've read that on Telegram as well. And you said that your confidence in that was from your conversations with Eve. Therefore, are you saying, or were you saying, that Eve supported the Fractally approach to producer selection? And if so, can you tell us what he told you to convince you that the BPs would be okay with this new, radically new consensus mechanism?
Well, he told me it was more of a general, I support decentralized governance. I think we need to prove it and move in that direction. That was more of a commitment to move in that direction and to figure out the process over time, as demonstrated by how he funded Eden with initial seed rounds and expected additional rounds. So, he had been funding Eden, the experiment there. And so I had reason to believe that, all right, as that works, budgets could be increased. I asked for a percentage of inflation to be directed to Eden, not to myself, but to the community of people democratically elected under Eden as a alternative budget allocation system to the quadratic voting or to ENF grants. So I figured that committing to that budgetary funding, and the other thing I asked for was to replace half the block producers with a fractal governance process. So we'd have a hybrid model that was half token represented, half democratic. And I think one of the major sticking points is the Eden community's English time zone comprised of people that don't have the capital in the system, whereas the people with all the money in the system are in China and Korea, and he's over there speaking with them, coordinating with them, and dealing with things in their time zone, traveling to visit them, lived over there. So he has all those connections, and that's where the money was, and therefore the voting power. So there's a question, well, why should this group of English-speaking EOS enthusiasts, which included developers, people like Anchor Wallet. I went around and I got all the major projects, invited everyone I could see in the English-speaking world to come and join. Got Brock and others. Just try to get as big a coalition as possible so that it would be representative, and then they could then invite the people that would support it. But even so, there's like, who are these people? They don't have, why should they govern us? Well, why should they? And then there's, of course, the general distrust. Can this democratic process allocate funds, or are the funds going to be just wasted? And I think it's one of those things where it's a nonlinear progression. You give a little bit of funding, you can't really do much with it. Right? You have to get up the step function to actually make a difference. And anything too little funding, even if it's just even if it could be quite a bit, is going to fail. You have to get a little bit more to create the incentive to show up and participate, to be able to fund more than just yourself, to hire a team, to have long-term continuity and projections to create those incentives. And so a little bit of funding is going to give the appearance of failure. It's like you're trying to launch a rocket into to the moon, and you only load it with enough fuel to get off the launch pad, but you're not going to get escape velocity. So if you don't have critical mass, you're not going to get the outcome. And then you can say, look, it failed, right? It didn't work on a small scale. So that's that's a lot of what I'm looking at there.
Okay, so that's really interesting. So you're kind of saying that purposeful underfunding is a mechanism for the appearance of support, but then you can have the have the argument to say, well, it was funded, it fails. So we did our bit. I just want to go back to what you said previously about the block producer cartels. So could you describe to the viewers, because not everyone necessarily knows all the details about this. So could you explain to us what you mean by a cartel of block producers based in China?
Well, this is, you have the exchanges. They got all the customers' deposits. They vote for each other and basically form a kind of like a political party, right? So when we say cartel, you could also view it as a political party. Exchange A votes for Exchange B and vice versa, and collectively that gets them into the top block producing slots. And if you don't have support of the large players, you don't get the votes. And the only way the large players will give you their votes is if you give them your votes. And in a certain respect, that's a consensus forcing function. There is consensus, and the cartel is not necessarily a bad thing. Where it goes south is when the parties don't feel any obligation. There's no accountability to do things for the public good, right? For the network. Instead, they take all the money and they use it for themselves. But then what they realized they could do is they could take some of the money and pay for votes. And once that snowball gets started, and once they reframe it as staking rewards and all these other things. If you don't also play that game, you're not competitive and you're not going to get the votes. And so you get this group of people who's got a moral philosophy of, get tokens by any means possible. And it doesn't matter how you get them or what you do with them. It's your right and you have no obligation to anyone else. That's the attitude. of people playing the blockchain. It's like mining. Mine by any means possible, and you win, and the tokens are yours, and there's no obligation to the group. So it's not really cooperative for the benefit. Now, I say all this, but from an English-speaking side, I have very little insight to what's actually going on in China and Korea and everything else. And these other communities, they've got developers, they got people doing things, and it's just opaque from the English side. So there's this language divide. And one of Eve's talents has been trying to bridge this language divide. And that's one thing that I can find commendable about what he's attempted to do. Although he's made it a little bit of a religious thing, but by which to judge people who don't take the time to translate like he does. It's like translating is more valuable, or it's just somehow disrespectful not to translate what you're doing. And I think that that's a rather divisive technique, which, yeah.
Okay, so I'm really interested to know, and you have touched on quite a lot of this already, so forgive me for repeating some of it, but I think having it as a kind of holistic answer would be really, really cool. So what was the grand vision then for Eden 2.0, the ENF, DeFi, the real governance of EOS, and then for EOS? So had everything gone to plan, how would EOS look today under your vision?
There would be all the people that are involved in EOS would be meeting once a week. They'd be sharing what they've done for EOS, whether it's writing code or marketing or doing interviews or getting listed on exchanges or getting apps ported over or whatever. And we would be getting to know each other, community growing. There'd be incentive to invite people to join and participate and contribute on a weekly basis. The EOS token would then be used to subsidize a governance token, if you will, that's awarding people, and that would be amplifying the economic value of people participating in the governance reputation side of things, giving leverage to the inflation of EOS without so it's like amplifying the incentive to participate, because a certain amount of value will be held in the governance token, and not sold into EOS, which basically amplifies it. So, and all this would be run on the EOS blockchain. There'd be a DeFi exchange, and lots of people would be able to build communities that in different languages that are using this exact same model. And the EOS token would be subsidizing the Spanish community and the Chinese and the Korean community, but each community would have its own governance token. And those governance tokens would also be subsidizing the liquidity. So we'd have all these bridges between all these different things, and we would not have the centralized ENF governance that we have today. So, there's a number of things that I think just really hinder EOS taking off as a DeFi platform. And then there's other technological advances that we included in Sybase that I would have liked to see EOS have adopted. But from a governance perspective, that is what I would have seen.
Okay, that sounds great, to be honest. All right, so let's go back to, I kind of want to go back into the details of what went down. So let's look at January this year. So when did you first hear about the ENF's decision to take legal action against your former employer, block.one? And was that the moment that you had, or you and your team maybe started to have doubts about how the ENF was progressing?
He told me that something was going to happen, but didn't tell me any details about 3 days beforehand. And I strongly encouraged him not to attempt legal action against block.one, right? And this is not because of any bias or fear I have of that legal action. I know there's a lot of people that think that I've got some kind of exposure there. But it's more to do with the mindset of, well, first of all, it's been almost 9 months. I haven't seen any action taken to date. So it's very divisive. And I think having a common enemy unites people, but I think it unites people in a negative way, like let's go tear someone down. And I was thinking, well, what possible outcomes could you get from that? The community already acted unilaterally to take back what it had the autonomous authority, whatever it was sovereign over, the tokens and the blockchain. And I thought, hey, blockchain consensus is what it is. That's, it's not theft, it's consensus, it's voluntary association. If block.one disagreed or community disagreed, they could fork EOS and go a different direction and block.one would be made whole. The community has a way of resolving these things. That's what blockchains provide. As soon as you ask the legal system to get involved with respect to a blockchain and tokens, now you're totally changing the characteristics. You're trying to have your cake and eat it too. You don't want to be a security, but you want to act as if you are a security. You want to be a decentralized organization, but you're not. So what's the outcome? They win and block.one has to buy back all the EOS tokens? No, if they don't buy them back, block.one has to pay everyone a dividend, or block.one has to give E&F a big pot of money. None of these outcomes, I'm guessing Eve's thing is, oh, they can give me a big pot of money and then I can use it for the benefit of the network. That's what I think. None of the other things make any sense. And so obviously they've got some legal theory. They're not disclosing their legal theory. By not disclosing their legal theory, it's a way of saying, well, there's something there, but I'm not going to tell you what it is. So it could be anything. And it gives a maximum flexibility with, and you can't actually, how can you fight something that's not defined? You can't argue against it. They say, we have a case. All right, well, can you tell me it so I can see, is it legitimate, or can we debunk it, or can we see? No, we have some case. But I think it just creates the wrong atmosphere, the wrong type of community. And I don't think that, I'm all about decentralized governance. Decentralized governance is community coming together, figuring out how to resolve their disputes without going to the courts. As soon as you give a court's jurisdiction over what happens on chain, and implied contracts between a blockchain and a company, that's where we get into the messes that we see today with the FBI, Department of Justice suing DAOs. I think it's just a really dangerous precedent to open that Pandora's box. Probably why they haven't actually filed any lawsuits. And I think there's an element of, if they open that door, they also open doors for countersuits for taking block.one's tokens in the first place, and making threats to do so, and all kinds of things that are just distraction. It's not building up a community, it's tearing down a community. It's sending people away. Why would you want to join a community where, if E&F doesn't like what you've delivered from an open source perspective, they're going to sue you and demand the money back? Like, I don't want to do business with people that are lawsuit happy. And so that's that was the start of the breakdown. And that's now, because up to that point, I was doing everything with E&F we don't have a contract. I just send an invoice, you pay it or not. I do all the work up front. You get to see it, right? There's this kind of just loose trusting thing. But after that, I'm like, man, I better have a concrete contract in place that establishes exactly what I have to deliver, that I agree to, so that I don't get into a situation where I didn't deliver what I promised and they're going to sue me on the terms of whatever verbal contract that they think was implied based on public statements that may have been made in whatever way. So it just created an environment where all of a sudden it's not a trust base. It's a, hey, shields up, get the lawyers involved, write all these contracts. And then, and that's when, we had to get really precise about what we're going to do. And it was no longer, because what Eve told me is, Dan, I'm going to fund you to do whatever you want to do. I don't want to get in your way. I'm going to, just tell me what you need. I'll give you the money. And you go build the governance. I support what you're doing. Eve would say, I have no idea about technical vision or future. That's your domain. And so the very first time I said, here's what I want to do. And here's the amount of money I'm asking for. It was like, oh, you're asking for too much. I can't do that. So.
How much is too much? That's still a real question. Don't worry. That's very surprising. And must be quite disappointing for you as well to experience that. Okay, so let's go back to February because this is really interesting now. We've put things in context. So I want to go to February, which was the Fractally launch. Now I stayed up all night reading the white paper before it came out. I was very impressed with it. I thought it was great. And some of the highlights were, obviously, you were proposing to change the block producers. Eden would be empowered, or kind of evolve, I guess. And you also be getting the killer upgrades that you were talking about, like the faster finality, NFT standards, the DeFi exchange, all of that fun stuff. But as we know, that didn't happen in the end. The ENF, as you said the price was too high. But they also mentioned that there was a perceived lack of communications from you. I know that Eve wrote that on Telegram. So what happened was then your multi-sig or your proposal on the EOS network was rejected by the BPs. And then subsequently the Eden on EOS chief delegates felt somewhat blindsided because they were kind of waiting around for Fractally to launch, and then it launched. And I think from their perspective, they would have liked to have been taken on that journey with you. I think that maybe they were a bit nervous about, there was a lot of changes, obviously, to their role at the time. So I just wanted to know, really, is there ways you think, with the benefit of hindsight, you could have taken maybe the community along with you? And, in your own summation, what went wrong with the launch?
Well, developing in the open, designed by committee. I talked about a lot of the things that ended up in the Fractally white paper leading up to it. Maybe not all of it, but there's so many different things that have to be integrated and coordinated, right? You have to balance all these things, and you can't really do that in a group committee setting. So Fractally white paper was, here's my proposal for the direction to go, right? That was my best guess. And it was an opportunity for the community to then give feedback on it, right? I didn't say Eden had to adopt it. I said Eden could adopt it if it chose to, and I would encourage it. And of course, I was open to any feedback on how to enhance it. So there's a phase for writing an idea, and then there's a phase for reviewing an idea. It's like, any idea starts off as a proposal or white paper or a document. That you have to do that with a small group of people, very, very focused, and then you present it out there as a complete thought. Otherwise, you're getting partial thoughts over time. Different people are reading things at different time, and no one gets the whole picture. No one's ever on the same page because it's never there. So you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. So I chose to do the Fractally white paper and a video that outlines and explains how it works so that everyone could be on the same page with what the idea was to the best of my ability to communicate with a solid vision. And then we could critique it. And I spent a lot of time trying to get that done. It's not that I didn't go develop this all in secret and say, hey, everyone, right? I spent the time for the proposal, right? The white paper is, here's my proposal. Now discuss. And a lot of people really, really liked the proposal, right? And so much so that the community spontaneously started doing weekly meetings. It wasn't even on my agenda to do weekly meetings until we had the software. But 2 weeks after we announced it, we were having weekly meetings, and we had weekly meetings every week for the next 9 months. And that was, and it was very, very successful, even without the software, even without doing everything manually. It was a successful governance process, in my opinion. And I think a lot of people who participated in it had a very similar experience. And it would have been on steroids if there was a token that was actually transferable and a user interface to automate some of the rough points and so forth. So I think the Fractally concept and idea, as outlined in the white paper and enhanced with community feedback, right? We had 9 months of community feedback meeting every week. I mean, that's as open of a development process as you can get. Yeah, I lost track of what the original question was, but
I was just talking about the launch of Fractally, and maybe we could have improved it a bit more. I think you said something pertinent. You said I communicated it to the best of my ability. So maybe communication specialists maybe would have helped. But I don't think it's a massive deal. I think you ran into some trouble anyway with the ENF and Eden by that point. So I think, yeah, it was a busy time. I just want to go back, if this is okay, briefly to August 6, 2021. And to your blog post where you wrote maturing to decentralization. I'm just going to read you a small segment that you wrote. You wrote, when a community loses its way, a strong leader is required to restore a unified vision and establish a new governance structure, which embodies that vision. If a community chooses a philosopher king, then he or she can provide greatly needed decisiveness and rapidly get things done that would be difficult to achieve any other way. If a community chooses a self-serving king, then he or she could quickly drain significant value from the community and scatter people. You then went on to say, Eden 2.0 is designed to protect a community from a spiritual leader gone corrupt. So my question to you is, how would you best describe Yves Larose? A philosopher king, a self-serving king, or a spiritual leader?
Sure. So the idea of More Equal Animals, my book, Eden and Fractally, is you have to protect the ability of the people to reach a new consensus. If people can't reach a new consensus, then you've got incumbent advantage, right? You've got some governance structure that is not representative of the people. A spiritual leader is somebody who has no power to compel the community to do anything on their own, but people follow them anyway. And a political leader or a civil leader is someone who has power and authority, right? They got armies and judges and courts and everything else. Or in the case of blockchain, they've got the money and the political votes and the multi-sig powers. If they can't be removed, then they can do whatever they want without accountability. And so the purpose of all my research into governance is how to prevent the incumbents from using their position to cause the government itself to become an entity that's living for its own sake instead of as a servant of the people. And that is the challenge with government and governance is people come together because they want to collaborate. They establish a government, and then the government becomes a thing on itself, and it rules the people that it was supposed to serve. Right? It happens over and over and over throughout history. That is the hard problem. All the technology, that's the easy problem. And so that's the problem I've been trying to solve my entire career. And blockchain, everything from BitShares to Steam to EOS has been implementing the steps toward getting tools to facilitate people collaborating on a large scale. So when I wrote that, I was saying, look, I like to be more of the spiritual leader. I don't like to exercise power by virtue of I control the money, I control the keys, I set the direction of the network. Right? I like to say, guys, this is the direction I think we should go. Are you going to follow me? Will you go this way with me? And some people will agree, some people won't. And the challenge is with innovation is sometimes you need to pivot. You realize that idea doesn't work, and now here's a new idea. And every time you pivot, you lose half your base. Right? Not everyone wants to agree with the new direction. And if you have a civil king, with the political power.
I think the phrase you used was self-serving king. In
self-serving, yeah. Well, I mean, you have your political authority and you've got your religious authority. I'm just using that from a, historical analogy. The political authority is, if it's not held accountable to the people, then it becomes a private entity, a private interest, self-serving of the people in governance instead of serving of people. So governance needs to protect the ability of the people to reach a new consensus. And if it can't do that, then you need a benevolent philosopher king who's going to use their power to hand control over to a system that returns power to the people. They have to voluntarily give up that power. They have to fund things that will take power away from themselves. And that is scary because every time you give power to someone else or you give power up, then it's like you raise a kid and they're going to go off and maybe they'll follow the directions you raise them up in, or maybe they'll completely rebel against their parents and do everything that they were raised not to do. And it's particularly bad when it comes to get masses of people. So I had hoped that Eve and E and F would be the philosopher king that would fund decentralization of governance and work to put themselves so they're no longer necessary, or at the very least they're a check and balance, but they're not going to put their finger on the scales of which way things go. But I think a lot of people want their Messiah to be someone who's going to come and conquer and overthrow Rome, right? They want them to be a strong leader with an army behind them that's going to come and run things the way that they think things should be run, right? The assumption is always, well, if someone just had enough power, they do things exactly how I would want them to do it, and that would be what should happen. But the mindset of if someone had enough power that would fix things is the problem. Because you have to be willing to allow things to go in a direction you don't go. You can't demand compliance because the power to demand it, right? It's like the communists who say, well, if we can just overthrow the status quo, right? We can get rid of evil capitalism, and then sure, we'll be tyrants for a while we clean things up, but we'll eventually give it power back to the people. No, that's never how it goes. So that's when I wrote that blog post, that's what I was saying was, well, having a little bit of control in the short term from someone who's benevolent, who can wrangle the complex DPoS process to funnel money into building a truly democratic system that can break the cartel, that would be great. And if the block producers are on board with going toward more decentralized governance, better governance, perfect. We're all going in the same direction. But what I think happens is people say, no, we like having a strong leader who's going to come and execute a vision with, and charge forward, because they can charge forward in a much more coordinated manner. And if you are aligned with that vision, great. And you're like, wow, this is concrete. I can see it. I can touch it. And then you can decide, well, maybe I trust that leader. Okay, you're trusting a leader. How well has that worked out for every past governance out there? You trust the leader, right? Maybe you trust Steve Jobs, but do you trust Tim Cook? Maybe you trust the initial founders of Google, but do you trust the board of directors put in? So if you establish these power structures, eventually the power is captured. You have to create a structure that resists the power being captured. And that has to be an attitude at the foundation of the community. And if it's not there, you can't force it on people. You can't force people to adopt a more decentralized system, right? It's an example. If you take I don't know how much you know about Jewish history, but there was a period of time where the Jews were ruled by nothing but judges, right? They had judges resolving disputes, and there was no king, right? But the Jews looked around and said, everyone else has a king. A king is more organized and orderly. We want to be like everyone else. Give us a king, right? And well, if you have a king, they're going to take a third of everything you have. They're going to take the choice things, and it's going to be terrible. But if you want a king, fine, have a king, right? And I think it's the exact same scenario with every single community. People are tempted to want a strong king and to move away from a decentralized dispute resolution, consensus building process where the king is God, or the philosophy of truth, right? Or a common understanding, right? You don't need a man making rules. You need the consensus of the people where each person is independently following that guidance. So I know I'm speaking in very religious terms, but the principles I think are a good analogy.
Well, I mean, it seems natural to have to speak somewhat in religion when you're speaking about governance and society's order, because obviously religion was the first versions, or not necessarily the first, but very, very early human versions of ordering society. So it makes a lot of sense, and I'm sure you read a lot about religion in your quest for
I think you can view it this way. You've got rule of man and rule of law, right? Rule of man is some guy is making the decisions, and if you have political connections to them, whatever they say is go, right? Yeah. It's the model of Pharaoh, where he decides whether the sun comes up or down, right? And basically Pharaoh is worshipped as a god. And that's where our society is going, where the president says, you agree with me, or you're an extremist that needs to be eradicated, right? And the courts can do whatever they want. There's no need for any type of logical consistency. Rule of law, on the other hand, is we all share a common set of beliefs, the Constitution, or human rights, or all these different things. And that is higher, that's above every person. That is like God. You're being ruled by God there, because it's God being the one that's enforcing the common set of beliefs that's above any man. And so if you don't have that, right, if you don't have that common set of beliefs that's above any man, then you have rule of man, and rule of man is what results in tyranny. And so even if you have a decentralized consensus-based process, all the participants need to hold a set of values that are above any man. And among those values are things like don't steal, don't kill, tell the truth, don't covet, Ten Commandments are pretty spot on in terms of set of values that are necessary in order for a group of people not to fall into tyranny. But what do people want to do? They want to go into tyranny. They want the king to rule over them so that the king can promise them, I'm going to take you riches, right? We're going to conquer lands. We're going to do all these things. Just give me the power, and I can get all this stuff for you, right? So give me your power, and I'll give you that. I'll give you something you want. And then it's always a lie. It's always a lie. Give me power, and anyone who wants power, be very wary of.
So, this isn't a question, but what I find so fascinating is that even from an intellectual kind of experiment standpoint, you've got these visions these visions of how governance can work, how we can overcome human fragility, right? The weaknesses of the consistently throughout humanity. And you do it, right? You give the power away and you see what happens. And I think you probably are now an expert at giving, creating something, giving the power away, and then watching what happens, and then learning from what happens and trying to incrementally improve that. So I can see your whole raison d'etre with that. I find that really
that's actually people's biggest complaint. They want me to be king, right? It's like, George Washington, they wanted to make him king. And he was one of the few people in history who says, no, I will not be your king. And so I don't want to be the king. I'm not power hungry. People might say the alternative, but I have a track record of creating governance structures. Like with BitShares, before I left BitShares, I created a governance system where they could fund themselves. It might not have been a perfect system, but there was worker proposals and so forth. When I built Steam, it had a governance system that was meant to be self-funding, where the community could vote to allocate tokens and everything else. I always tried to empower the people to make decisions on their own, and then ask them to follow me as I try to enhance it and improve it. But the problem is people figure out like, oh, here's the loopholes in the game. I figured out how to play this game and win. And now that I've won, I don't want to change the rules that enabled me to win or enabled me to profit. And my proposed changes, which would then, undercut the way that people, quote, cheated or undermined the intent, they work against it, and then there's a split, and that just has happened over and over and over again. And that's why blockchains are supposed to fork. But each time you fork, some people are upset because they're like, we were following you, and then the community abandoned you. It's like, why don't you rule it with an iron fist? Well, then I'd be centralized. I wouldn't be creating this decentralized thing you want me to create anymore. And so, it's the paradox of the best thing. The best way to achieve it is to have control, right? The best way to achieve my vision is to be in control. But if I take that control, I never find out if the airplane can fly, right? The best way to make sure your airplane doesn't crash is to keep it on the ground. But no, you gotta go up in the air, and it might crash, and it's good. And so despite all that, I think BitShares is still running. Steam, now Hive, is still running. EOS is still running. Each of these organizations has self-organized and had a life of its own, and been able to do things without me. They haven't done the decentralized governance thing, and they've kind of centralized in various ways, but there've been various amounts of success in various things. And considering the very, very hard problem, like the hardest problem of all human history that I'm trying to tackle, I think that you have to expect that. And the other thing is, even if you had the perfect governance system, if it's being run by a corrupted people, it doesn't matter what your governance system is. People will convert it and undermine it and have a shadow government that ends up controlling what's going on instead. So you need people to stay true to the religion, true to God, or they will follow man and strong leaders, and then they'll undermine the very thing that they originally showed up for.
So I think it is a human trait to be power hungry, to want to seize control. There's an experiment in, I forget which university, maybe Stanford or something, and they got a bunch of students, and they tossed a coin before they played Monopoly, and one person was given half the amount of resources, and the other person was given the full amount of resources. And they tested this maybe 100 times with 50 different random pairings, and every single time they recorded the Monopoly match, the player with the advantage, the unfair advantage, just purely by chance, right? They became arrogant, they became dominant, and they've started to act as if, like, you know, this advantage was for their skill rather than being completely by chance. And that was just Monopoly, right? You had the player with the most money banging the pieces around the table. One consistent trait was the person with the most money always ate, and they ate kind of aggressively and consistently, even through jest. They would always put down the weaker player. So that, oh, I've got so much more money than you. Oh, you're going to struggle now. Oh, you know, would you like me to give you some money to bail you out of jail or whatever? And the professor said literally all 50 of the people of the pairs, every single one of them, with that pure chance advantage, took it and then felt like they were entitled to that advantage. So with the innovation of blockchain and smart contracts, it seems that, like, we've accepted that humans are fragile and they will always nearly always seek you know, power and wealth and strength, and they'll never really give up the power by choice. So do you feel then that, like, smart contracts and blockchains are really the only way we can enter a consensus mechanism that is truly trustless?
I don't think smart contracts and blockchains solve that.
Interesting. Why not?
Well, every single blockchain out there has become centralized, and you might decentralize certain aspects, but there are certain dependencies, and you always have to look at where your dependencies are. And it doesn't matter if you have all the smart contracts in the world. If somebody has a monopoly on food production, they call the shots, right? So what is the equivalent of food production with blockchain? The people who host the internet, the infrastructure of the blockchain. And once you get to a certain scale, it has to be in large data centers. It's beyond the technical skill level of the average person to run the infrastructure. And so it will centralize, and those people call the shots. And if not the internet infrastructure providers, the people who provide the exchanges, the brokerage between people who have tokens and people who want other currency or other tokens or real life goods, right? So if you created an eBay that was entirely goods for crypto, no fiat anywhere in sight, that entity would be able to call the shots. Which fork are we going to go on? Well, if the eBay out there doesn't support it, then you're going to lose all your customers, right? And so it means you have to have intentional decentralization, intentional redundancy, which means costs are going to be higher. Economies of scale are going to centralize. And so just having smart contracts is not enough. You need to have an attitude of intentionally limiting scale, which means all maximalism, one blockchain to rule them all, undermines decentralization. You can't have one decentralized system. It's logically centralized, right? You need thousands of tokens and thousands of marketplaces online and thousands of exchanges. And you need, underneath all that, hundreds of countries with different independent jurisdictions. We've got like a two-polar world, China, United States, and maybe Russia, but China and Russia seem to be really chummy these days. So, and then you got all the vassal states, right? Where they pass laws, tax laws, regulations, sanctions, so forth, that can completely undermine things. So you have to solve things at the political level, at the social level, at the heart level of the population. And people have to coordinate of putting the group localism ahead of yourself. But what we've all done, and what the system, the powers that be, have discovered, is that they can convince the masses to sell out their sovereignty for a penny. Right? Oh, your toilet paper is a penny cheaper. All right, great. Everyone buy it at Walmart, and all the other stores go out of business, and now you're dependent. Right? So there's, and we're seeing some move back for nationalism and things like that, but we need not just nationalism, we need localism, right? We need that incentive. But when you do that, you're paying more. You have to consciously choose to pay more when the market says you could pay less if you bought it from over there. If you make your community dependent on China, it's cheaper. So what does everyone do? They buy all the Chinese stuff. It's no longer possible to manufacture stuff in the United States because China is cheaper. And so what do countries do? They do economic warfare. They subsidize, they tax the people to make their imports. They do all this currency manipulation. But that's the root of the problem, is if you don't transform people at a heart level, no governance system is going to make a corrupt people honest. No technology is going to free us. You have to have systems and people that are willing to commit to those systems and buy into those systems and sacrifice for that. If people's values don't change, we will get tyranny, and people choose tyranny. No tyranny exists that does not have the support of the people.
How can, I mean, I agree with you, but how can you change or evolve people's sentiment in their hearts? How can we do that? That's a huge challenge. And I wonder, does the answer lie in incentives?
Well, that's what Fractally was trying to do, was to create incentives to cooperate and to give to the public good. And one of the rules that Fractally had is no community was allowed to get beyond a certain size. It had to split off. Now that's a soft rule. There's no code you can write to enforce that. And if once your fractal gets big, like, hey, our token could go up even higher, and we could all make more money if we got bigger, right? And so, and then you look over at that fractal over there, they got bigger, and look how, we've got to compete, otherwise they're going to eat our lunch, right? And then next thing you know, you've got Pepsi and Coke, right? You got to be in one or the other, and then the leaders of those two get together and they maintain the two fractal system, right? The two-party system. And then eventually what happens is one gets a slight edge and they say, we're uniparty now. And anyone who's, on the other side is an extremist, right? That's how things evolve and have always evolved. If the people don't value the truth and value the principles above their personal profit. And there's only one way to do that. People have to fear something other than themselves, or than what they can get away with. They have to see some value that goes beyond this life. There's just no way around that. So I think that's the ideas in my book are tools and principles that show if you violate these things, this is what's going to happen. But you need to work together with people that have these shared principles, and you got to figure out how to pass those shared principles from one generation to the next generation, right? And that's probably the biggest challenge of it all. So blockchains, smart contracts, great. They automate things. They eliminate dispute. They eliminate ambiguity, which eliminates this. Eliminating disputes is like an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. That's what smart contracts are. They automate things. They verify things. They keep honest people honest. They don't make dishonest people honest. They don't make corrupt communities not corrupt. So that's where I see the role of this type of technology.
Wow. Okay, so I want to take the same concept, but go back to what we were discussing earlier, a bit more specific on the EOS history. So you described your experience working with the ENF and Yves LaRose in particular, and you mentioned this on this call actually, like a developer for hire, not as a partner. And then you went on to describe him and the ENF, him as a dictator and the ENF as autocratic. And I think you fairly clearly alluded to the same today in our call. So you wrote, this is what you wrote specifically. I couldn't do that while at B1, which was governance, I believe. When I left B1, I came to the community, but I didn't want to be in Yves's shoe as a dictator. I wanted to put the community in charge of picking leaders. That's why I supported the ENF, because of the commitment towards decentralizing governance. If I'm successful, it would make the ENF subservient to decentralized governance instead of the other way around. This means the ENF may have a conflict of interest. Therefore, my question is in two parts. First part is, did Yves mislead you to believe that you'd be working together as equals on governance, only to later betray you? And can you describe the type of conflict of interest that the ENF is now facing?
I can't speak to his intentions because, only Yves knows his heart in the matter, and things change, and he might have meant well. So I'm not going to judge that, but the reality is, from my perspective, Yves didn't seem to want the power. He wanted to hand it over. That's the impression I got. But it's challenging. It's really, really difficult to give up power because when you give up power, the people that were counting on you can be upset with you. Because, hey, you're driving the car, everyone likes where you're going, you hand the wheel over to someone else. Everyone else who's a passenger is like, I signed up for you to drive, not someone else. What are you doing giving it to someone else? And then, of course, if you want to see something be successful, everyone believes, hey, I know better than everyone else. If I give it to someone else, they're going to do worse than I'm going to do. Period. So I better not hand it over to anyone else because, for everyone's best interest, I know how to get us to our destination. So there's a temptation toward arrogance that you know best. And I think, even I think, hey, I know best where to go. The difference is I'm not going to make everyone go with me. I invite people to go with me and persuade people to go with me, but I don't try to hang on to the reins of power. Yeah. Does that
just to conclude this section then, do you stand by or do you now regret, with the benefit of hindsight again, the support you offered to the ENF upon its inception?
Hindsight's 2020. I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't supported it. I think probably approximately what happened would have happened anyway, just without my support. I'm not going to have any regrets. It's all just trying to figure things out and figure out who's with you and who's not.
Yeah, it's an iterative world, right? We've got to experiment and figure out who we can trust and who we can't. So you're no longer building now on EOS, and we're going to speak about Sybase momentarily. But I just wanted to ask, why are you no longer building on EOS? Is it primarily to do with the lack of funding available to you? Was it to do with the situation with the ENF, or was it just because the ENF didn't fund you? So yeah, why weren't you building on EOS anymore?
I wanted to build decentralized governance. I think you need to have autonomy from top to bottom. So if you're building a concept like Fractally, are you going to build it on top of a tyranny? No, you don't build on that. So I asked for some signs that the EOS network was willing to invest money in governance, was willing to move in that direction in order to build on EOS. I asked for some infrastructure that I thought needed to be there, but that infrastructure wasn't valued. Other things were valued. Now it wasn't at an exclusion. People could have funded it to help build that infrastructure, and I viewed there's an opportunity cost associated with building on EOS versus starting a new chain, and potentially a really big opportunity cost. So getting just the basic costs covered of building some of that infrastructure, and then I was giving away all the upside to the being able to start fresh with a new chain, to fix all the problems. Right, it's one thing you can go a lot faster when you're not trying to maintain backward compatibility, and you don't have to go through all the political processes, and you can fix a lot of mistakes and get a better foundation for a longer run into the future. So it costs more money to build on infrastructure that is going to be less than ideal. And so I was asking for just a teeny little bit amount of money to cover some of that friction, and to bias that, but also to signal the willingness of the community to support what I'm doing, right? And it was more the signaling aspect of it, right? A couple $1 million is nothing, right? But the signal that I got is, Dan, we think that what you're doing with governance is not going to add a couple $1 million to the market cap. You leaving, therefore, is not, you can't say that it's not worth giving me $2 million and then blame me for leaving and causing $1 billion loss in the market cap. It's either my presence and innovation and commitment to build is worth a couple $1 million, and you keep $1 billion worth of market cap, or it's not. You can't have it both ways, right? And so, so my interpretation is, well, if it's not worth a couple $1 million, which is not padding my pockets, it's going entirely to the developers building software on EOS, then, all right, that actions speak louder than words. And so there's just this, I think the attitude I think that people have, and I could be wrong, is, well, you benefited from block.one, you owe us. So you should be giving us a couple $1 million, or you should be building on us for free. But that type of entitlement attitude is, I don't know. It's challenging because block.one ended up with $4 billion. I didn't end up with $4 billion. When I left block.one still had $4 billion. So it's, people trusted me and my vision, and block.one ended up walking away with the lion's share of it. And so, they want me to make up for that. But at the end of the day, technology is only a small part of the problem. Culture of the community and society is what drives things. And I think that's the problem.
So Dan, what can we do to help Eden on EOS then? Because I know that from their point of view, and this has been mentioned by the ENF a few times, there's a sense that perhaps you abandoned Eden on EOS. And Eden on EOS right now I think everyone would agree, is not only rudderless, but it lacks a clear purpose. And if it lacks a clear purpose, it's kind of a consensus mechanism for the sake of consensus. As elegant as it is.
Eden and EOS wasn't abandoned by me. I can't make Eden and EOS anything without the EOS network giving them authority over a meaningful budget or block producers or some type of authority. Otherwise, it's governance for governance sake, and it's entirely pointless. It becomes a charity, a charitable organization where people are donating money and time for the benefit of EOS. That's not a compelling situation unless EOS had a strong moral public good associated with it. And so, yeah, I think Eden on EOS is pointless without direct support from the EOS community in terms of funding and or authority. Do they get to approve hard forks? Do they get to have multi-sig authority over smart contracts, dispute resolution, right? Producer authority. What type of authority are you willing to give the organization? You don't even have to give them funding if you give them some authority over some aspect. But without any authority over anything, without any funding, it is a pointless organization. It's an organization that exists only because it's got a budget from the initial amount that was given. And so, I know that's kind of hard, but that's why I left EOS. It's like, well, if you're not willing to empower Eden or Fractally, even symbolically or publicly commit to move there once the software is done, I'm not going to spend years building software that then pretty please adopt it. And they're like, no. Like, no, you got to commit, show me up front that you're serious about adopting what I'm going to do. And if that means that you're doing some token amount of funding and you're doing some other things to indicate that's what you're going to do, great. But if you're not going to show me today that you're going to support where I'm going, then I'll go work with the people who want to play the game and want the vision I want, and they can come on voluntarily do that. But
so, do you have any advice then for the delegates of Eden on the EOS, because they seem to be the ones who've got the short end of the stick really here, because they are passionate believers of and supporters of you and more equal animals, and the attempt to find a new consensus mechanism for EOS. And then on the other hand, you've got the ENF.
There's only one thing people can do. You have your ability to say no. They don't have the ability to make anyone else on EOS do anything. If people want it, they have to say no. And if they're not willing to say no, then it's dead. And so how can people say no? Well, Anchor, for instance, could say, you know what? We're going to cut off all services to EOS until it gets funding for Eden. The delegates, B's and everyone else is all right. We're shutting down. You want us, everyone who wants Eden needs to just leave until Eden gets funding. And otherwise, you're giving your time to the community without any recognition or value in return. And that was what I tried to solve with Fractally, is how do we reach consensus on each person's contribution of their time and energy? That's the challenge. And if you don't recognize it and compensate the people who are giving their time and energy, eventually they burn out and they walk away and the community dies. And the problem is, when you're trying to get thousands of people to contribute their time and energy to make something successful, that's too much for a centralized entity to evaluate. How many employees can a company manage? You got a top-down hierarchy. You have to have a lot of power to delegate. And even then, it's really hard to filter in and judge all these subjective contributions of thousands of people. It's just not going to work. And the only thing that aligns people in cryptocurrency is price going up. right? And they say, don't do that, just make the price go up, as if price going up is a dial you can just turn. It's like, why are you writing code? Make the price go up. Why are you marketing? Just make the price go up.
Dan, thank you so much for your time. It's been an incredible interview. I'm super stoked and excited to see what Sybase turns into, and we'll definitely be a part of it. So congratulations on everything. Yeah, and we look forward to speaking with you again soon. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you. See you next time. Bye-bye.